Got to get it in. Does to Smith. Jabari for three and the win. Yeah! He got it.
We are here to Field Rocks News. This is the Rocksfield Podcast. Of course, I am your host, LaShawn Binkley. And we have more breaking news for the Houston Rockets here. The Houston Rockets been pretty much involved in the majority of the news this off season. And this time we have reports from ESPN that the Houston Rockets have agreed to a new contract with Fred VanVleet. It's not necessarily an extension because they declined his third-year team option for close to $50 million this upcoming season. They declined that, and they now just signed him to a 2-year, $50 million contract, which, if you think about it, kind of works out the same way as if they accepted the player deal, except now it's over 2 years instead of 1 year. And also it helps the Rockets get under that first apron, which is always important. Not necessarily doesn't mean a lot to actual fans, but it means a lot to the front office, believe me, because they look at that. They don't want to go above that first apron. Definitely don't go against the second apron when it comes to for tax purposes, because that's when restrictions start coming in on who you can sign. That's when you start getting hit with penalties. So now the Rockets with this new deal are under that first apron, which they may actually go back over if they decide to sign a free agent. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the show, but I want to talk first about the Fred VanVleet getting a new contract. Not necessarily a surprise. I think most people already knew that the Rockets wanted Fred VanVleet back. Fred VanVleet wanted to come back to the team, but he realized that the Rockets also had to do what's best for them, and that's why they declined the deal. But again, I think this was already pretty much worked out before the season even ended. When I talked to Fred, and we talked to Fred in the media after the games towards the end of the year, you can kind of tell that he was ready to come back to the team. And I know, elephant in the room, his numbers dropped off this season. His three-point shooting dropped, his assists dropped, his points per game. Pretty much all his numbers across the board dropped when it came to his second season with the Houston Rockets compared to his first season when he helped the Rockets have their best assist season in their entire franchise history. And yes, you heard that right. In his first season, the Rockets had their lowest turnover rate in the franchise's history, and a lot of that had to do with Fred VanVleet. Fred VanVleet is not a dynamic point guard. He's not going to make fancy passes that are going to end up on ESPN or anybody's top 10 list. But at the end of the day, he brings the Rockets exactly what they need. Even when you're bringing over to Kevin Durant, you still need guys that the younger generation, like the Amen Thompsons and the alperensenguns and Jabari Smiths and Tari Easons, you need guys that you need a guy that gets respect across the league, and Fred VanVleet does that. And like I said, I know his numbers dropped last season. He struggled at times during the season, but you can't overlook how much his leadership factors into this. And for better or for worse, MA absolutely loves Fred VanVleet. Every time we talk to him after games, he's always singing his praises. He sees him as a second coach on the floor. From day one, I remember walking into training camp, Fred VanVleet's voice was the first one I heard in the gym, barking out orders, giving directions. Sometimes he's even leading these practices. I've been at practice where he's actually leading the practice, going through different drills. And again, I know you would like to have more from your point guard. You would like to have him be able to score in the paint. That's something that Fred does struggle with. But the Rockets really do value his leadership. They feel they have enough around him to where they can kind of help with his limitations. And they'll need Fred to shoot better next season. There's just no doubt about that. I don't care how great of a leader you are. You still have to make open shots. And yes, Fred numbers did drop last season, but if he can get back up to that 38% run, three-point shooting, I think that would definitely help going into this next season. And also, this 2-year, $50 million deal works good for both sides. Fred gets a player option in the second year. Even if Fred really continues to drop off, after the second year, they're going to be done with that contract. And like I said, if Fred feels that, well, he doesn't want to be back after next year, he can just not accept the player contract, and then he can go ahead and move on to another team. So it works out best for both teams. The Rockets get a discount as far as they'll be paying him like around $15-20 million less than they would have been paying him if the Rockets would have accepted that a third year on his original contract. So at the end of the day, it definitely works out good for both sides when you're looking at it. Again, the Rockets were going to pretty much do this. This is not like some huge shocking news that they re-signed Fred VanVleet because they definitely wanted to bring him back, especially with the reported trade, because it's still not official, but the reported trade for Kevin Durant. They felt that they need to keep as much continuity as they could because, of course, you're replacing two starters. You didn't want to necessarily have to place three starters. And let's just be honest, as of right now, the Rockets don't have a better point guard option on the team. I know they're going to get Reed Shepard a bigger role this upcoming season. And maybe Amen Thompson get better at the point guard role, but I think Amen Thompson is really going to continue to excel at the forward position where he is right now. And Reed Shepard is still only a second-year player. He's still going to need some time to develop, and you really don't have any other point guards that you can really put there. So, and anytime Fred VanVleet was off the court last season, I know that a lot of times people just see him as a person just passes the ball down in the post to alperensengun, but anytime he's not on the court, the Rockets offense looks lost. It's not always necessarily about the player making the point guard making all the plays. It's about him getting the people in the right positions and at least just be able to get the ball up the court. Because a lot of times the Rockets, when it wasn't Fred VanVleet, they struggled just getting the ball up the court against strong pressure. So yes, again, you would like a little bit more from a player that's making 25 million plus a year, but you also got to remember the salary cap's going to be going up with a new TV deal. So this $25 million isn't the same $25 million you've seen in the last few years. So again, Fred VanVleet resigns for the 2-year, $50 million new contract, which will kick in next year. He has a player option for his second season. To me, it's a win-win all the way around. But the Rockets still do need somebody else to take away some of his minutes, because even though he did play less minutes last season, he played 40 minutes a game in the playoffs because the Rockets just didn't trust anybody else. And then when he got hurt, they struggled because they really didn't have anybody that can play that point guard position on a permanent basis. So you still would need to bring in somebody else. And the Rockets do have the $14, $15 exception that they can sign a player with. Like I said, they do use that. They'll probably go over that first apron. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think that Tillman's at the point where he's willing to do that because they are trying to compete for a championship. They also have the veteran minimum. When you look at the free agent list, it's not a lot of big names on there. You have players like Malik Beasley. You have players like Dennis Schroeder. So to me, Dennis Schroeder would be the perfect backup. He's not necessarily somebody that's going to want to start every single game, but he can come in. He can provide the things that Fred VanVleet is not really good at, and that's getting to the basket. He's still a good to above average defender. So if you could bring in a Dennis Schroeder who can play 20, 25 minutes a game at both guard positions, you can cut down on Fred VanVleet's minutes. And when Fred is struggling, then you will have a player like Dennis Schroeder. And Reed Shepard will still have his opportunity. If he plays well enough to where maybe he outplays Dennis Schroeder, that's great. But you still need somebody else. You need a more veteran point guard to back up Fred VanVleet, because I agree with everybody else that Fred VanVleet needs to be playing less minutes regardless of how he's playing next season, because he's already at the age, getting close to 30, where he doesn't need to be playing 35, 40 minutes a game. And also his production is just not justifying him being on the court that much. So like I said, you have play like Malik Beasley, Dennis Schroeder, who I would love if the Rockets are able to bring over. You got players like Trey Jones from Phoenix that started a lot last year, even though he's kind of struggled last year, but come off the bench, I think he would be another good option. So you have some options out there that you can bring and play backup point guard to Fred VanVleet. I think the Rockets will definitely explore. And another thing to keep in mind, the Rockets may not be done wheeling and dealing, kind of moving on to another subject before I wrap this up. Of course, the draft is tonight. The Rockets will be drafting. They do draft tonight, but they will be drafting for the Phoenix Suns. So whoever they pick in the first and second rounds is going to be going to Phoenix once the trade becomes legitimate on July 6th. So that's something to keep in mind with that. But there are reports that the Rockets may be trying to trade back into the draft if they see a player that they like that's dropping in the draft, a la Cam Whitmore, where he dropped all the way down to 20. And it's kind of funny that I mentioned Cam Whitmore, because if they do trade back into the draft, he may likely be the person that they do trade to get back into the draft. Again, it depends on if it's a player that's dropping, I would say, outside the top 10. I don't see him trying to trade back into the top 10. Maybe late lotto, later first round. I can see them may possibly moving a player like Cam Whitmore because they don't want to give up any of those future picks. That's why Phoenix was fighting so hard to try to get him, and the Rocks would just not give those picks to him. So the only really person I can see them trading is Cam Whitmore because they've already traded away 5 of the second round picks, so that they won't be able to do anything with the second round picks. So keep that in mind tonight. There's a real possibility the Rockets may try to trade back into the draft, and that Cam Whitmore may be the person going out. And again, Cam Whitmore got all the skills in the world. I don't necessarily really think the problem with him and the Rockets is his skill level. I think it's more to do with other things outside of the court. Even though I know there's some things they want him to improve on, his defense, his passing, and taking better shots. But overall, he has great skills. He has the skills that he can sustain being a really good scorer in this league. But I think it's more than just the stuff that you see on the court that the problem the Rockets have with Cam Whitmore. So that's just something to keep in mind with that. But again, the big story today is Fred VanVleet re-signing for the 2-year, $50 million contract. He will be with the Rockets at least through this next season. Then we'll see after that because he does have that player option. So again, a win-win for both sides. We'll see how that works out. We'll keep an eye on the draft, see how that plays out. And again, have to break in and give you that news. As usual, it seems like it always happens in the middle of the day when I'm out. So, but I want to still give you that news from my car. So definitely let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think that this is a good deal for either side or both sides? What do you think about the free agent market as far as point guards? And also let me know, what do you think about tonight's draft? I think the Rockets possibly trade back into the draft. So definitely let me know down in the comments. As usual, I appreciate all the support. And make sure you check out the next episode of Rocket Fuel Podcast.